I'm Jill Cox Cordova, and this is the Do Something Different interview. Today's guest is Dr. Kris Marsh. She's a sociologist and demographer at the University of Maryland, where she's also a tenured professor. In 2017, she was a Fulbright Scholar in South Africa. She also has a forthcoming book called The Love Jones Cohort: Single and Living Alone in the Black Middle Class. Kris describes herself as unapologetically Black and Christian. With no further ado, here's Dr. Kris Marsh.
One of the things that's really important about COVID-19 and this pandemic, this global pandemic that we're in, is that if we make it on the other side of that, that's a win, that's success. It doesn't matter how you got there. The fact that we got to the other end of this thing is impressive, and everybody needs to be patted on the back for that. Now, particularly being single and living alone during this pandemic, for me, I can't say for anybody else, but for me, if I'm not a stronger person physiologically, spiritually, economically on the other side of this, I've absolutely missed the mark on the point of this whole thing. I want to know myself. I want to love myself. I'm going to be a much stronger person on the other end of this. And there's some things about me that I don't like. Let's just be real honest. What? Well, okay, so I do believe that I look at emotions through an academic, intellectual lens, but emotions are irrational. So trying to rationalize the irrational thought and idea doesn't work very well. So I'm learning how to be more just open with the irrational aspect of emotions, but I come at emotions from a very academic perspective. So I want to relax that some.
Okay. What have you learned about yourself?
So I have learned that there's a couple things that make me uncomfortable, and I'm learning how to be comfortable with uncomfortableness. So I'll give you a benign example, then I'll give you a more substantive example. I don't like bugs. I have a fear of bugs. Anybody that knows me knows that I don't like bugs. I know they're 100% bigger than me, and I get it. I understand that. I just don't like bugs. So when I bought my house in 2009, I was like, I'm going to plant all these wonderful flowers in my front yard. I like lilies and I like orchids. Orchids were way too expensive, so I went with lilies. So I was going to plant lilies in my front yard. I bought all these lilies, all this little stuff to do my gardening. And the first shovel that I put in the ground, I saw worms. So of course I screamed, I yelled, I ran in the house, I called my landscaper, and I had him come plant the rest of my plants. That was 2009. Here it is 12 years later.
Almost.
How many years? Almost 12 years later, I was like, you know what? I'm going back out to my flower bed and I'm going to plant some plants. So I went to the nursery and got some plants, and I said, okay, I'm going to address my fear of bugs. So again, as soon as I put a shovel down in the ground and pulled up some dirt, I have worms. My grandmother taught me that worms are really good for your soil, but not good for my soul. So good for the soil, but not the soul. So what I did was every time I saw a worm, I stood up, I went to the sidewalk, and I was like, you got it. You got it. Go ahead and do what you're going to do, worm. I'll come back in a couple seconds. I come back. The worm was gone. I was able to do my gardening. So it's a small, benign kind of example of that uncomfortableness. The other thing, in a more substantive kind of way, that I was uncomfortable with was people often talk about the stock market, and I did not know anything about it. And so I want to be able to hold my own in any conversation. But when that conversation came up, I was like, Kris Marsh is uncomfortable because I just don't know the lingo. I don't know anything about it. So I was like, by golly, I have time. And because I have time, I am going to sit and figure out how to do online trading.
Wow.
Buying and selling stocks. I'm no longer uncomfortable with that process. I feel very comfortable engaged in a conversation. I have at least a fundamental understanding of a buying and selling and limit and market and what all of that means. So that was really important to me. Besides me just learning how to do online trading, I was like, whatever I use, I want to own. So if I buy it, I'm going to own it. So I'm really trying to be, I'm trying to think of economics in a savvier kind of way and say, yeah, if I use an iPhone, I'm going to have stock in iPhone. Now, I don't have a lot of money to buy a whole bunch of stock. I got one share, but I got a share of Apple. I am really, really committed to writing in my journal every day. for two reasons. One is because I find it to be therapeutic. It's cathartic to actually take a pen and paper and write something down. If you type it on your computer, it feels like an email. It feels like work. If you type it in your text messages, it feels like it's an engagement with some of your friends. You want to get into like the spiritual part of yourself or the metaphysical part, however you want to say it. So for me, what I do is like every morning I write a letter to the Lord. I'm like, here, because I believe in God being my higher source. So for the believers, write a letter to God. Tell them what you're thankful for. Tell them what you want to work on. For the non-believers, you can write a letter to whatever you want to write a letter to in your journal. So some people are like, how do you journal? I'm like, I just write a letter. Some people, maybe not believers, don't believe in God, don't want to use God. What you can do, you can write a letter to your 12-year-old self. If you write a letter to your 12-year-old self, you got to be brutally honest and sincere, because you don't want to hurt your 12-year-old self. You're going to tell them some of the things that you did right, some of the things you did wrong, some of the ugliness about you, because you want to protect that 12-year-old self. You can lie to everybody else, but you can lie to everybody else, but you can't lie to yourself, and you shouldn't lie to your 12-year-old self. So if you're writing to your 12-year-old self, you really are addressing some of the ugliness of who you are, but you got to sit with that uncomfortableness for a little bit. It's important to sit with that because it kind of shows you who you are, who you want to be, and where you're going. So on the other end of this, you're a much stronger person. So write to somebody every day. And I'm really, really, really committed to doing that. And I'm just hopeful that once 2020, this pandemic is over, I don't get busy where I don't do that, because that makes me very grounded. And it's important that I do it. And I hope that I will continue to do it.
Do you plan to continue with the stocks and the gardening too?
Yes, for the stocks. We're going to come back to gardening in a minute. But with stocks, I believe that since I am a sociologist, I can use my sociological imagination to really think about what's happening now, what's happening 10 years from now, what's going to happen 5 years from now. So I'm really excited to see. I've done some investments, and I'm really excited to see 5 years from now what's going to happen. I wasn't really trying to make money. I was really trying to learn the process. So you literally can start with like $10. And I was trading penny stocks left and right. I was making 8 cents. I was losing 12 cents. I was like, I got this. Then I thought sociologically about some of the other stocks. So I bought some stocks. So I'm excited to see how that's going to do long term, 5-10 years from now. But it was less about making money. It really was about understanding the process. Gardening, okay, I think I got over it. I got over those bugs. I think I'm good. I can embrace my fear. I know that I can get over it. It's going to take time. And I have to be kind to myself. There is beauty in uncomfortableness. And we don't think about it like that, but there really is beauty in trying to step back, be self-reflexive, and not have any distractions or disruptions in that learning process. So it's okay to be uncomfortable. There's some things that I've done right, and there's clearly some things I should have done differently. And I'm so eager to tell my 12-year-old self, don't do this. And it's funny, the reason why I chose 12 is because I don't know about for you, but for me, when I was going to be able to say I'm a teenager, like 13, I was like, I am grown. I understand life. I have figured everything else out. So you can't tell. I don't know if you could have told my 13-year-old self a whole lot of stuff, because I was now a teen. But 12, I think, is a good year right before you start thinking about being grown and you know everything. But so for me, it really is kind of like embracing that uncomfortableness. It's so important. And we don't want to, it's not comfortable to do the emotional work. We find everything we can to distract us than doing the emotional work. We all have some ugliness that we need to address.
Sure.
Yeah. And when you can't even acknowledge that ugliness is there, that's when you got a problem. When you can't acknowledge that there's some uncomfortableness about you, that's when you have a problem. When you refuse to do the emotional work, that's when you have a problem. But let me tell you who doesn't have a problem. Kris Marsh. Because I have decided I am committed to doing this and making myself a much stronger person on the other end of this whenever we get out of this situation. This is nothing we've ever seen before. So you don't know what productivity looks like. You don't know what success looks like. You don't know what failure looks like. All we know is that we're going to get through this. So be kind to yourself. And as long as you're kind to yourself and get to the other side of this, then we won.